From advertising to software as a service to data.
Across all of our programs and clients, we've seen a 55 to 65% open rate.
Getting brands authentically integrated into content performs better than TV advertising.
Typical lifespan of an article is about 24 to 36 hours.
If we're reaching out to the right person with the right message and a clear call to action, then it's just a matter of timing.
Welcome to the MarTech Podcast, a Ben J. Shap LLC production. In this podcast, you'll hear the stories of world-class marketers that use technology to drive business results and achieve career success. We'll unearth the real-world experiences of some of the brightest minds in the marketing and technology space so you can learn the tools, tips, and tricks they've learned along the way. Now here's the host of the MarTech Podcast, Benjamin Shapiro.
Welcome back to the MarTech Podcast. It's just you and me today, marketers. Well, we've made it to Q4, which means a couple of things. First off, winter is coming, and the MarTech Podcast is now 6 months old. For those of you who are new to the MarTech Podcast community, at the end of each month, I tell you how we practice what we preach in the marketing of this show. And as we do every month, let's start off by recapping the goals that we set for ourselves in Q3. Last quarter, we had 3 primary areas of focus. Scaling our audience. Our goal was to reach 10,000 downloads per month, which actually was our goal since we've started this podcast. The second goal was to lower our cost per acquisition. And the third was to understand monetization, figure out how people are monetizing content assets like podcasts. So let's break down those goals one by one. First, talking about scale. So there's good and there's bad news. On the positive side, the MarTech Podcast was downloaded over 1,000 times more in September than it had been in the previous month. That said, our goal was to reach 10,000 downloads, and we came up a bit short. I'm not going to lie, I'm a little disappointed that we didn't reach the 5-figure download mark within the first 6 months of production on this show, but on the other hand, it's really a vanity metric. Since launching this podcast, our audience size has consistently grown and our engagement metrics have been remarkable. 92% of our listeners have become subscribers. On average, over the past month, our listeners have listened to roughly 85% of each of our episodes. So our goal for the podcast was originally to reach 10,000 downloads. And I said in one of our previous episodes that one of the lessons that I've figured out, or at least I think I know, is that whenever you set an initial goal for a project, it's great to have lofty goals, and likely it's the wrong goal. And so now that this podcast has an audience and it has a following, I still very much want to achieve the 10,000 download milestone. But what matters is more that we are serving the people that are consuming our content and building out a great way for them to understand marketing and to connect to new marketing vendors. And that's really the ongoing monetization strategy for this podcast, which we're going to implement. So even if we didn't hit the 10,000 download mark, we ended up with 9,000 downloads. Actually, it was like 9,072 in September. We didn't do any paid investment, so that's probably the reason for not hitting our goals, is that we didn't actually implement a lot of the marketing strategies that we had planned to, just because life got in the way. But at the end of the day, it's been 6 months, and I've really enjoyed working on this project, and we have a meaningful sized audience that is engaged with our content. So even if we didn't hit our goal, there's reason to be optimistic, there's reason to be excited, and I just want to thank you before moving on for sticking with this show. Okay, so let's move on to goal number 2, lowering our cost per acquisition. This month, we set out to invest $1,000 in marketing. We ended up investing $0. I didn't have time to place our paid buys. Normally, we go through our podcast advertising dynamic insertion platform, Knit. And so far, we've invested $5,000 in advertising, primarily through Knit. And we've driven 28,000 downloads in total, 9,000 of those coming this month. And that means that our blended cost per download for the show is 17 cents. So that rate is great. 17 cents per download feels like a good amount, but that's obviously decreased over time as we've built our installed base. So as I mentioned before, one of the reasons why I think that we didn't hit our goal was my plan was to invest $1,000 a month in paid advertising, primarily through Knit, which is the dynamic insertion podcast advertising platform. And purely because life just got in the way, didn't end up placing the ad buys. And that's one of the reasons why we had a shortfall. So as much as I feel bad that the MarTech podcast didn't hit the 10,000 download per month milestone, I have no one to blame but myself. Let's move on to our third goal and talk about monetization. So over the past 3 months, I've talked to you about a few different forms of monetization and different ways to make money from a content asset like a podcast. And I've been breaking this down into 3 different parts. First off, there's advertising. To get advertising from the sort of enterprise scale level podcast advertising platforms, the Squarespaces of the world, the Casper mattresses, FreshBooks. From what I understand, you need roughly 50,000 download per month. We're getting to the 10,000 download per month mark. So I think we're still a little ways away from advertising being our focus. We're going to start testing in the next quarter. One of our goals is going to be finding some more niche advertisers who are looking to build awareness and doing custom advertising deals. So if anybody that's listening to this show is looking to promote a MarTech tool, we'd love to have you as a guest on the MarTech podcast. And we have some pre-roll and post-roll advertising spots that are going to be open starting next month. So if you'd like to reach out to me and talk about advertising on the MarTech podcast, feel free to email me at podcast@benjshap.com. The second way people are monetizing podcast and content assets are through referral or affiliate relationships. I'm very excited to say that I've signed an agreement with the Knit marketing team. Obviously, I have been an advocate of Knit from day one. They're one of the reasons why I have a podcast audience. I truly believe in this, and this is not because we have a referral relationship, but I'm going to be trying to test not only podcast advertising and influencer marketing tactics to try to drive customers to Knit, but I'm also going to be doing some paid advertising on their behalf. So if you're interested in learning about podcast advertising, I do have a relationship with Knit, but honestly, I've been promoting their services since way before we ever got together and started talking about how we can work together. It's a platform I truly believe in. I have told you about how I have invested in it. I've put roughly $3,000 of the $5,000 I've invested in the MarTech podcast advertising into the Knit platform. And they're one of the reasons why we have 9,000 downloads per month this month. So if you're interested in learning more about the Knit platform, in all of my ad reads for the last 2 episodes, hopefully you've heard that you can book a 30-minute media strategy session with me. My calendar is filling up, so if you're looking to learn more about podcast advertising in October, now is the time to do it. Otherwise, we're going to have to wait for a little while. I'm trying to get to everybody. But if you would like to talk about podcast advertising, specifically about the Knit platform, but also some of the other platforms that I've tested, you can book some time with me by going to benjshap.com/knit, KNIT. And that's one of the first referral or affiliate relationships that we have. I want to be as transparent as I can about them. The Knit platform is great. There is no minimum buys. You set your own budget. I just want to educate you on how it's worked for me and walk you through some of the details of their platform. So if you're interested in learning about podcast advertising, let me be your advocate. I would love to do it. No charge to you. The last way that people are monetizing their podcasts or content asset is through lead generation for professional services. One of the things that I've tried to avoid doing on this podcast is turning it into a sales pitch for my consulting practice. But I do want to take a second to talk to you a little bit about who I am and some of the work that I do for my consulting clients. I generally break my products down into 2 segments. There's brand development, which is the process of building a marketing foundation, which helps you understand who your customers are, making sure that your marketing message matches what your true company identity is, building an authentic voice for your customers. And the second part of my business is marketing strategy, which is figuring out what channels of marketing your customers are interested in and helping you validate that those channels work without asking you to invest a ton of budget or make long-term commitments. So if you are a marketer or if you're learning marketing, if you're an exec at an early stage or a growth stage company, and you're looking for someone to help you figure out if you're saying the right thing to your customers or if you have a channel that you're looking to validate, I would love to get in touch. You can find more information about me and my consulting services or get in touch with me through the Contact Us form on my website, which is benjshap.com. Okay, enough of the sales pitch. Let's recap. To date, spent $5,000 in marketing to drive 28,000 downloads, which means that the cost per download for this show is 17 cents. I'm pretty proud of that. If, let's say, we've hit 9,000 downloads per month and are on pace to hit our 10,000 download per month goal. So at the end of the day, I feel like I'm learning a ton about marketing. I've met some really interesting people by producing this podcast. Our engagement metrics look great. So that to me says that you, our audience, have been enjoying the content that we've created. So I feel like this relationship is really working out for all of us. Thinking about our goals for next quarter and looking back on what we've achieved this quarter, the podcast has grown significantly. We are almost to the 5-figure download per month mark. And I feel like the work that we've put in have helped us build a great relationship with your audience. This upcoming quarter, we're going to set a download goal. I want to get into the 5 figures and continue to grow the podcast. Let's say that our goal is going to be 15,000 downloads per month by the end of the quarter. But more importantly than the download goal, really what I'd love to do is build better engagement and get to know my audience more. So if you are interested in being a guest on the MarTech podcast, if you have feedback for the show, or if you just want to show your appreciation for the work that we've put in, I hope that the content we've produced has helped you learn a little bit about marketing. I would love to get in contact with you. I'd love to learn about how you view this show. So you can reach out to me at podcast@benjshap.com. You can go onto our website, which is benjshap.com. You can see more of our content at martechpod.com. You can leave us a review in the iTunes store, send us a tweet, benjshap or benjshap LLC. I would love to boost our engagement this quarter, and that's really going to be our goal for the rest of the year. Lastly, we're going to start on some monetization experiments to see if there's a way that we can start making some money off the podcast without being overly salesy or obtrusive. So one of the things I promised to you is that we will not disrupt the content. We're going to try to make this as user-friendly as we possibly can. And I think that our relationship with Knit, where we're adding value and trying to walk people who are interested through their tests in podcast advertising, is a good example of how we plan to monetize the podcast moving forward. So if you're interested in booking your podcast advertising session with me, I've got a couple sessions open for the rest of this month. benjshap.com/knit. That's KNIT. There's also a link in our show notes. If you'd like to learn more about our consulting services, you can go to benjshap.com. You can always email me at podcast@benjshap.com. And moving forward, we've got some great episodes coming up. We're going to talk about analytics this month. We're going to be learning about video advertising, specifically about YouTube. We've got some great marketers that are more generalists. We're going to hear about their career. We're going to continue to bring you great content all the way through the end of the year. Maybe we'll even talk a little bit about the holidays. So if you have any questions, if you're looking for marketing support, or if you'd like to be a guest on the MarTech podcast, click the link in our show notes, or you could head over to our website. As I mentioned before, it's martechpod.com, or you can go to benjshap.com, which is my consulting website. Thanks for listening, and until next time, my advice is to just focus on keeping your customers happy.